Australia has one of the highest levels of animal ownership in the world, with over 2/3 of households having at least one animal. But what this also means is that in cases of family and domestic violence, animals are also impacted. In many cases, suffering abuse and also being a factor in making it difficult for people to leave abusive situations. Welcome to Law for Community Workers. This is episode 5 of our series, Till the Violence Ends, where we share insights from experts in the domestic and family violence space. In this episode, Bridget chats to Alison Waters about the impacts and legal changes surrounding pets and animals. Alison is the Policy, Advocacy and Research Lead at Lucy's Project. Lucy's Project is a national charity that aims to improve the safety of people and animals experiencing domestic and family violence through collaboration, advocacy, research, and education. This episode was produced on the lands of the Gadigal people, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. As we share in education today, may we acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first storytellers, lawmakers, and educators. As a reminder, this podcast is general information only and can't be relied on as legal advice. It's accurate at the time of posting, but may have changed if you're listening at a later date. If you or someone you know needs legal assistance about a particular situation, start with our team at Law Access New South Wales via web chat at legalaid.nsw.gov.au or call 1300 888 529.
Alison, welcome to the podcast. Our podcast series, Till the Violence Ends, is focusing on domestic, family and sexual violence, and I'm delighted to have you agree to speak to us about Lucy's Project. Would you please tell us how Lucy's Project came about, the background to it?
Sure. So Lucy's Project is currently a national charity. It was founded in Lismore in the Northern Rivers of New South Wales in about 2013. And it was founded by a woman named Anna Ludwig. And she had been volunteering at the local community legal centre working on some animal law type matters and was very interested in those issues. And sadly, Anna had a stillbirth with her daughter Lucy, and decided that she wanted to create something positive out of the grief and an enormous loss of her daughter. And she founded Lucy's Project, and the idea was to advocate and support women, children, and animals who are experiencing violence, specifically domestic and family violence. So that is how the organisation was founded. It's largely been run as a volunteer organisation. A couple of years ago, the organisation secured some funding from the New South Wales government, which allowed it to employ some staff. So I came on board last year as a result of that funding to work on advocacy, policy and research.
Why do we need services like Lucy's Project? I guess what I'm really asking is, what's the connection between animals and domestic and family violence?
So we know that in Australia, about 70% of Australian households share their lives with animals, and that it is really common for people to regard animals as treasured family members. We also sadly know that animal abuse and domestic and family violence frequently co-occur. And one of the reasons for this co-occurrence is that perpetrators of domestic and family violence may threaten, harm, kill, or neglect animals to control and intimidate women and children. So the types of animals that are impacted by violence will include companion animals. So commonly what people would think of as dogs, cats, rabbits, guinea pigs, the kind of animals that live in our homes. Farmed animals, so cows, sheep, goats, large animals like horses, which is particularly relevant for people who live in rural and regional areas. Also assistance animals, so animals that have a role to support humans who may have disabilities, other needs for assistance from an animal, and also wild animals, so that includes native and introduced species. So we know also that unfortunately perpetrators might target an animal for whom a victim survivor has the most affection. So that might occur in a multi-household family. The perpetrator will know the animal that the victim survivor has the strongest bond with and will exploit that bond to perpetrate intimidation and coercive control. The types of violence that we see inflicted by perpetrators of violence on animals include physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional and psychological abuse, neglect, and also verbal abuse. There are a couple of reasons why it's really important for us to understand this, is that what this abuse and violence and threats of abuse and violence mean that victim survivors may delay leaving a violent partner because they have concerns for the safety and well-being of their animal companions. The other reason it's important to know about this issue and take it seriously is that we know that animal abuse can be an indicator of future frequent or more severe forms of intimate partner violence. So, for example, the National Risk Assessment Principles for Domestic and Family Violence that are from ANROS state that cruelty and harm directed to pets and other animals can indicate a risk of future or more severe violence. So I suppose the other reason that it's also important that I also want to add from Lucy's project's perspective is that we also regard animals as victim survivors in their own right. So animals are sentient beings. They are capable of experiencing suffering and distress. So they are not merely adjuncts to their human family members' experience of violence. Animals may in fact be the first target of violence where a perpetrator is trying to exert coercive control or intimidation over a woman and children. So we think for that reason it's also important to protect animals. So basically, at Lucy's project, we have a number of things that we believe or hold to be true, which is that people and animals both have a right to be safe from violence. We recognise that the safety of people and animals is interconnected, and we think that people and animals should be supported to heal and recover together.
Yeah, very important. Lucy's project is not a project that can provide facilities for the care of animals. The work that you do is separate to that. Would you speak about the work that the project does?
Sure. So we are a small team. As I said, we're a national charity. The key aim is to improve the safety and well-being of people and animals impacted by domestic and family violence. So we do this by collaborating and building partnerships across sectors, so across the human service sector and the animal welfare sector. We advocate for policy, program, and legislative change. That's mostly my role. And we undertake and promote research, and we also deliver education for services and workers, and that can be accessed for free currently on our website. To give you some examples of things that we've worked on recently, within the advocacy space, we have written submissions recently. So I've written a submission to the South Australian Royal Commission into domestic, family, and sexual violence. We've participated in stakeholder consultation in New South Wales with the recent amendments that were made to the Residential Tenancies Act, specifically the section around making it easier for tenants to rent with pets. And we've also been involved in the statutory review of the domestic violence provisions in the Residential Tenancies Act. And we also did some collaboration with legal and animal welfare organisations in Tasmania, which was some really fantastic work. Tasmania was the only jurisdiction that didn't include acts of animal abuse as potential family violence. So every other jurisdiction recognised that animal abuse could be a form of domestic and family violence. So we advocated in Tasmania, and an independent member introduced a private members bill to recognise threats to harm, actual harm, neglect of an animal with the intention to coerce and control a victim survivor, recognising that as an act of family violence. And yeah, and we also run conferences. So recently, back in October, we had a 2-day online conference, and we brought together about 30 practitioners, academics, from the human services and animal welfare space to talk about specific issues such as how the domestic and family violence sector can support people and animals to be safe together. What is the role of veterinary services and animal welfare organisations? What role can they play in being a pathway to safety for women and children who are experiencing violence? And we also had some people speak about the really important role that animals can play in helping people to heal and recover from trauma. And I think that's another really important part that often we don't think about, is that the family have experienced the violence together, and that when children, for example, may be separated from their animals, if they go into a refuge with their mum, for example, and the animal can't be accommodated in that refuge, that then that places further distress and grief upon the child, for whom so much has changed and so much has happened. To then be separated from their beloved animal then compounds that stress and trauma. And it also does for the animal as well, who's experienced violence and then has maybe not been able to stay with their family. So yeah, we recognise the importance of that unit being able to heal and recover together.
Out of that 2-day conference, do you think that there is forward momentum for improving things for families and animals in this situation?
Definitely. We had a lot of interest in the conference. We had people who spoke at the conference who said, wow, the fact that we have 2 days of topics that we can talk about here, 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. And so felt that it was a really valuable experience in that regard. And we're in the process right now of putting together our conference report, because we do have some recommendations that came out of that were made by practitioners, that were made by people with lived experience of domestic and family violence and animal abuse, and people who were doing research. And we really want to bring all those groups together more next year, where we're going to be organising a roundtable of researchers and practitioners to come together and look at what is the research saying, and where are the gaps that we're not fulfilling that in our frontline roles. I think one thing that really strongly came away from the conference is that everyone, wherever they're working right now, can become more animal inclusive in their practice. And what I mean by that is, if we're asking clients about their family unit, if we're asking a woman, for example, do you have children? It's really simple to ask, do you have animals? And to find out who that woman, that client, regards as her family unit. Is she concerned for the safety of her children? Is she concerned for the safety of her animals? Have the animals experienced abuse as well? Are there any services that they need or issues that the animal is having? So, yeah, it's really about, you might not be a refuge that provides accommodation to animals. You might be a court advocacy service, for example, or a legal service or a community service, but you can certainly ask the question. And I think it's really important for clients to know that we care about who their family is. So if a woman is saying to us, oh yeah, my dog Toby is really important to me, then it's really important that we uphold that for her, and ask questions about Toby as well, and to show that we care about her situation and her family unit.
Alison, I know that Lucy's project can't provide accommodation for animals or assistance with that, but because of your experience in the sector and the work that you're doing with Lucy's project, are you aware of places that people's animals can be cared for, or are there refuges that exist that can accommodate people and their animals? Is there a move towards um, funding for more refuges of that model?
Yeah, so in New South Wales, we have what's called the core and cluster system. And the idea for a core and cluster is that so women come into the housing, there's common spaces where the women and children can come together with others, but they have private spaces, so private units to live in. And those units have been designed to also be animal inclusive, so that women and children can take their animals into crisis housing with them. So we know that some more of those are rolling out across the state as we speak. So that's obviously a positive move. And in Victoria, where they implemented core and cluster, they saw a movement towards more people being able to be accommodated with their animals. I think one of the things is, it is difficult if women have been offered a place in a refuge and they can't take their animals with them. We know that sometimes women will not take up that place. They don't want to leave part of their family behind, and they may then stay living in a car, or staying in some other type of housing that's not safe or for them and their children and animals. And we know that in those situations, if a woman and child go into a refuge, there are limited resources about what can happen to an animal. RSPCA have a community domestic violence program, and the idea is that animals would be accommodated in RSPCA facilities, or if there's not a facility in the local area that the woman is needing the support, that funding would be provided for boarding in a private kennel in the area that the person lives. Not total funding, so there's still a contribution that the woman would be required to make. Unfortunately, we know at the moment that RSPCA program is at peak capacity. They are unable to take any more clients, so that is a problem. There are small organisations who are trying to pick up the slack. There's one called Pause and Recover, which started out as a Sydney-based organisation, but now is trying to support victim survivors more broadly across the state. And so that is an organisation that organises foster care. Volunteers will offer to foster animals within their own homes while the women and children, or the woman is in crisis housing, and then once comes out of that and moves into her own accommodation, the idea is that she'll be reunited with her animal. I mean, we know that private rental is an issue that, and we think that although there have been some amendments made now, we still think that it's going to be difficult to rent in the private sector. So, look, this is really an area that we really need to focus. And the amount of times I spoke to women in my work as a specialist frontline domestic violence worker, and I'd be referring women to local refuges, and they'd tell me that they have an animal, and I know that that refuge doesn't take an animal, and they then don't want to take up that option because they don't want to leave part of their family behind. So there's definitely, so while the Corin cluster is definitely a move in the right direction, we also know that I think this issue is more widespread than we've ever known because we don't collect data. So we don't have the data to tell us how many people have chosen not to go into a refuge or take up a service because it hasn't also been able to accommodate their family member. And we had a couple of researchers from the Australian Institute of Family Studies spoke at our conference back in October. They produced a paper called Family Animals in the Context of Intimate Partner Violence. And they highlighted the need to improve access to crisis and support services that accommodate both human and animal needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the point of data collection, it would be of benefit for a number of reasons to collect data about families and animals because of the connection to serious harm that can occur.
Yes, and that's very important in a risk assessment framework as well. So it is important to be getting a sense of the violence that is occurring in the home. Yeah, and to find out what also what the children may have been exposed to in that home. It's an experience of violence. Sometimes children have been forced to participate in violence against their own animals. Sometimes children are trying to hide their animals to protect them. So, yeah, it's really important that we get a good sense of what goes on. We also know that it's sometimes women can carry a lot of shame and embarrassment about the animal abuse that has occurred in their home, that they haven't been able to stop it. And so we can't just assume or wait for women to tell us that. It's really important that we ask the question so they feel safe to tell us that we aren't judging that we want to get a full picture of the violence that's occurred in the home. And so by asking the question, we're more likely to have those disclosures. And we need to take the disclosures of violence against animals as seriously as we would take any other disclosures of violence that women make. And we need to record them down and take them seriously and collate them as data.
Alison, what about the way that the law, I guess particularly family law, regards animals? I think that we've spoken previously about some changes that you've seen happen with legislation where animals were previously regarded as part of a property pool, and now there's greater recognition that they're not just a piece of property in that situation.
So yes, there has been a recent amendment to the Family Law Act that does recognise animals as, I guess, a special category of property. So there's a recognition that people obviously want to make arrangements for their animals when they're separating. So essentially, a judge can make a decision about which party will have the custody of the animal. I think for us, our concern is that animals aren't recognised as victims or as targets of that violence in their own right. So the only consideration given to them is really based on what's happened to the humans in the situation and their human guardians, not actually what they have faced in terms of the violence themselves.
I guess the legislation only refers to companion animals, but what about sort of farm animals? Are they still considered as part of the pool of property in those circumstances? People who own horses, they would consider them companion animals in the same way and have the same love for them, but they'd probably not be, protected in any way.
Yeah, so we know women in rural and regional areas who experience domestic and family violence will face lots of different barriers, like the geographical isolation, the longer waiting lists, the part-time police stations. There's a lot of issues that women face that's unique living in these areas. I myself, obviously, I'm in a regional area. I'm in Lismore, and so I know that I would speak to clients who obviously wanted to find safety for their animals. Horses are a really good example. And yeah, we find that is a lot harder. There are some organisations, the Women's Cottage, for example, in the Hawkesbury area, has been doing some great work about forming connections with property owners in their area. So they've recently opened a core and cluster type model refuge where animals can be accommodated, but they've also formed connections with landowners in their area where horses and larger animals might be able to access agistment. So, that's obviously something that services could do, is to look at how they can broaden out their support. We know that raises some issues around privacy and safety as well. If you're in a regional area and a horse is a very specific looking horse, the person who's been perpetrating the violence may locate the animal. So there's certainly some safety considerations around all of that. But it's definitely the case that organisations are trying to come up with some solutions themselves about how they can support women who have large animals that are harder to just take with them in the car, for example.
What about the role of police and how do they respond where there's an animal in a family situation where they've been called out to deal with domestic violence? Are you aware of anything that happens there, or whether the police have been participating in the conference or any education around managing family animals?
Yeah, so we know that the domestic violence registry within the police have taken this on at the moment, and in the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, what happened during that week was Rotary and New South Wales Police combined together for their 16 days campaign to be about animals and people impacted by domestic and family violence. So I think that's fantastic that that's been recognised as an issue that needs to be talked about in that context. So the DV registry has been looking at how they can pull together some more resourcing around what are the accommodation options. And they've also now put together, there's a page on the New South Wales Police website, and they have some services listed there. I know we just talked a bit earlier about there not being a lot of services, so there's a lot of potential for more services to come about to be added to that list. But I think obviously that's been talked about a lot more. The Animal Welfare League and RSPCA are the subject matter experts on animal abuse. So sometimes, police recognise they're not the subject matter experts on that. But obviously, frontline police, general duties police, are in a very good position to actually recognise and respond to animal abuse because they are going into people's homes and they are, they're in a position to find out about abuse that's happening. And then, of course, the important thing is that police then make referrals appropriately if there are services that they can refer people to. But I think in terms of whether you see charges proceeding. I know what came across at the conference is often people are confused. We had some academics talking about some research that they're currently doing. It's some academics at Monash Uni and Griffith University, and they're looking at the issue of rurality, domestic and family violence, and animal cruelty. So they're surveying practitioners. The survey's still open, and what practitioners in the domestic violence sector are saying is that they're not clear on the reporting channels. So if animal abuse is happening in the context of family violence, do we ring the police? Do we ring the RSPCA? There's some confusion about that. Of course, in the area that I live in, we have one or two RSPCA inspectors covering a really huge area that they can't reasonably be expected to cover as effectively as we might want them to. So, yeah, there's definitely a gap in knowledge around who to contact. But we are hearing about some innovative things that are happening, for example, in Queensland. The Queensland Police Service and RSPCA Queensland have joined together for what they're calling an information sharing partnership. This is to help in cases where if serious animal cruelty is happening, that police are aware of that when they're going into homes, and also helping to, do some risk assessment and early intervention around whether there's domestic and family violence happening. So to share that information between organisations with, what we've been told, with the sole purpose of enhancing the safety of people experiencing domestic and family violence.
You also spoke previously about vets and the role that they can play. I just wonder if you could expand on that a little bit.
I mean, vets are sort of now, I guess, regarded almost as family practitioners, that people regard their animals as family members. They take them to the vet. They often trust vets. And vets are very much in a position to identify non-accidental injury to animals. And we recognise that they can provide a pathway to safety and support. For example, in Victoria, there's an organisation called FREE, a domestic violence service, and they've provided the 3Rs training, the recognise, respond and refer training, to veterinary professionals so that they can use those skills in their practices. They can have conversations with people about referring them to appropriate services. We know that is a safe place to have brochures and posters about domestic violence, so people coming into that space with their animals can find out about services. Lucy's project helped to facilitate some training for vets and other veterinary professionals like veterinary nurses back in 2018 at our conference that was held at Melbourne University. So for a long time, we've recognised that the veterinary profession is a potential pathway to safety for women, children, and animals. For example, one of the vets there who has an organisation in Victoria called Cherished Pets, who very much recognises the importance of supporting the human and family members. It's like a one health, one welfare type model, and recognizing the interconnectedness of animals and people in a family unit. And what Alicia Kennedy, her name is, what she was talking about is how in the veterinary clinic you will often see examples of coercive control, of financial abuse. You might have an opportunity to have a conversation with a client who says something like, oh, my partner really doesn't like my dog, and then ask the question, so why do you think your partner doesn't like your dog? And then have those conversations. Well, he always locks him in the laundry, or he yells at him, or so you can start to sort of have those conversations in a safe and supportive way, and then for vets to maybe have partnerships or a memorandum of understanding with local domestic violence service to have a protocol in place, like what do we do if this happens, who do we make the referral to. There's also a profession called veterinary social workers. And recently there was a New South Wales parliamentary inquiry into the veterinary workforce shortage in New South Wales. And one of the recommendations was that the New South Wales government consider how it can promote and support the establishment of the field of veterinary social work. So recognizing that people may be coming in with a whole range of other issues happening for them. They may be on the brink of homelessness. They may be experiencing mental health issues. They may be experiencing domestic and family violence. So what role would veterinary social workers then be able to play in supporting people to get access to the support and safety that they need?
This podcast series is directed towards community workers. Do you have any other suggestions for community workers working in this space?
Yeah, recognizing, as I said before, that if they're talking about their animal, to then regard that animal as a member of their family, and to make sure that you ask questions about that member of the family as you would of their children. But also to look at, is there training that staff could do in the organisation? What training could staff access so that they have a better understanding of that link between animal abuse and domestic and family violence? I've mentioned that we obviously have some training at the moment as well, online, that's free, that people can access from the community sector. Looking at maybe what partnerships they could have with other organisations. So if you're an organisation that wants to be more animal inclusive, so looking at your intake process, also looking at your referrals. So what organisations, getting a better sense of what organisations are in your local area that you can refer people and animals to. Maybe developing partnerships or a memorandum of understanding with your local vet clinics, your local foster care network. So looking at what are clients needing when they come in? Are they wanting care or safekeeping, as it's also known, for their animals? So looking at what exists in your local area. Are there foster care networks? Does the local council's pound offer any support or access for animal victim survivors? Is that an option? Looking at what local vet clinics might have to support. Can you have an arrangement where maybe the boarding costs might be reduced, for example? So I think there's sort of some key practical things. Obviously, I think, for people who want to do the broader advocacy work, I think there's a lot more we can do for governments in terms of helping them to think about what we need to fund. So when we're funding domestic and family violence organisations, recognising that animals are victim survivors as well. So what funding is required for services to be able to do that work well.
I also wanted to ask, what are the goals or the plan for Lucy's project in the coming year?
Obviously, our broader perspective is how we can improve the relationship between animal welfare sectors and the human services sector, how we can all talk to each other better so that we can more effectively support people and animals experiencing domestic and family violence. We will be advocating for further and additional funding and resources for domestic and family violence services so that they can be animal inclusive. So obviously, not just that core and cluster or crisis accommodation, but looking at what services who don't provide accommodation, what ways they could become more animal inclusive and ways that they should be funded and supported to do that. We, again, are obviously advocating for more training and resourcing for animal welfare workers and veterinary professionals. We've also been calling for more funding for research on the link between animal abuse and domestic and family violence, specifically with the aim of improving service responses, but also informing prevention strategies. And like I mentioned, the roundtable, so bringing academics and practitioners together to look at how we can do the work more effectively on the ground. And also, I'll be running a community of practice next year, because we know that there are a lot of people working now who are champions in their own organisation. We meet them every day. I meet them every day in this work. People who don't have specific funding to support animals, but who are trying to do their best because they know that that's important for their clients. And so, looking at how we can come together to provide more effective services.
So, in terms of the community of practice that you're going to create, how would people go about joining that?
Yeah, we do have a website, and so also people could contact us, on the generic email if you're interested in that. So our website is lucysproject.com, and it's Lucy, Lucy, lucysproject.com is the website, and
And the email?
the email is hello@lucysproject.com.
Do you take volunteers if people are interested in volunteering for Lucy's project?
Yes, we do actually. So obviously we are a small team, so it's about what capacity we have at the time. But we do have volunteers working with us. We had some fantastic volunteers helping to support our work for our conference. We have volunteers who have law backgrounds who support some of the work we do. So yeah, definitely if people think that they have some knowledge or skill or interest in being a volunteer, then we're always happy to hear from them.
That's all for this episode. Don't forget to check the show notes for more information and links to different resources mentioned in this episode. You're listening to Law for Community Workers. Catch you next time.